Hello and welcome to a special episode of To The Point. After the sudden and dramatic collapse of India-Pakistan talks late on Saturday night, how is the situation viewed in Islamabad? And how does the Pakistan government respond to the arguments made by Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj? With me to talk about the outcome from his government's point of view is Pakistan's National Security Advisor, a former finance and foreign minister of that country, Sartaj Aziz. Mr. Aziz, is the last-minute cancellation of India-Pakistan talks a serious setback, or do you believe we've seen similar setbacks earlier and this is part of how India and Pakistan conduct their dialogue?
Well, obviously, as you know, the India-Pakistan relationship has been a roller coaster affair. It goes up and then goes down, then it gets suspended. So I hope this is also what I would call a temporary setback. But obviously, we are disappointed that the small window of opportunity that had opened in UFA for resuming some kind of a meaningful dialogue has collapsed on such flimsy grounds.
Now, today, as a result of what's happened, in your eyes, is there greater strain and bitterness in India-Pakistan relations?
I think the lack of trust, which was always there, seems to have increased. Because you see, the basic point that I like to emphasize in this context is that when we had that discussion in UFA, the two prime ministers met without any precondition or set agenda. Then this record of their discussion was jointly drafted, and if there was a different interpretation of this agreement, we can't resolve it through press conferences and media interaction. If I had gone there and the first point would have been, what does this UFA statement means? We would have given our interpretation and we would have come to some conclusion. So converting it into a condition that you can't discuss this and you can't discuss that, that obviously became unacceptable because, and
okay.
Also when you come, what do you meet, whom do you meet and whom you don't meet? These were the two conditions.
I'll come to those.
My basic point is,
I'll come to those substantive issues in a moment's time and I'll give you a chance to answer them in detail. But you're saying to me that today, as a result of the grandstanding by both sides, as a result of the press conferences by both sides, the lack of trust has deepened. Have I understood that correctly?
I think so, yes.
So that means that in fact the bitterness and the strain has also increased in the relationship.
Well, I won't call it bitterness, it's disappointment, and somehow the gap in perceptions and the overall sort of attitude which then becomes, gets converted into red lines, make things more difficult.
Now, when he first became Prime Minister in 2013 and again last year when Mr. Nawaz Sharif came to India for Mr. Modi's swearing in, on both occasions he told me that improving India-Pakistan relations was his top priority. Today, when after the high point of UFA, the NSA talks have collapsed and haven't happened, when the distrust is greater, how does Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif feel?
Well, I think his commitment to better relations with India still remains unaffected because peaceful neighborhood is an important objective for improving our economy and reviving the regional connectivity. But obviously, we want to improve relation based on dignity and equality and not on a relationship that is not based on these principles. So I think our commitment to better relations still remains.
Whilst your commitment to better relations remains, would you concede that the challenge is greater today than it was 4 weeks ago?
Considering the present Indian policy and attitude, I would say yes.
In which case, let's then come to some of the substantive issues, and I want to put to you some of the points made by Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj. First of all, regarding the UFA statement, she says Pakistan is mistakenly placing greater importance on a sentence from the preamble whilst ignoring what is explicitly spelt out in the operative body of the statement about NSA talks. Have you misread the UFA statement?
Well, I don't think so. I think anybody who reads the UFA statement, and I have a copy right in front of me, will readily say that that interpretation of dividing the UFA into both preamble and all is not intended, because the statement that we regard as importance says they agreed that India and Pakistan have a collective responsibility to ensure peace and promote, and to do so they are prepared to discuss all outstanding issues. And then it says they also agreed on the following steps. If it was preamble and all, it says therefore agrees, accordingly agrees, so both are equal. And that's what I was saying, that if we had this interpretation, do we have to deal with it through press conferences? Can't we sit across a table and they give us our point of view, we give our point of view, and then we agree on what to discuss? So this is the point that I was trying to emphasize, that to invite a person at ministerial level for national security level talks, and then telling them you can talk about this, you can't talk about this. You can meet so-and-so, you can't meet so-and-so. This attitude basically impinges on our sovereignty and our dignity, because these things are not done. I was expecting that probably they'll say you can stay in this hotel and no other hotel. I mean, these are the kind of things that deflect a kind of attitude that makes things much more difficult.
Let's focus for now, Mr. Aziz, on the UFA statement. I'll come to Hurriyat in a moment's time. Your interpretation hinges critically on that word, they also agreed, which for you suggests that what follows is not as important as what preceded. However, let me quote to you from UFA. It says, a meeting in New Delhi between the two NSAs to discuss all issues connected to terrorism. How does that phrase, all issues connected to terrorism, include the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir problem? Surely that doesn't fit into this language. That's the Indian position.
Correct. That meeting between two NSA, but then the UFA declaration also said that both sides agreed to discuss all outstanding issues. So when an occasion arises, we are not saying we discuss all other issues. All we said was the modalities and a time schedule by which we can discuss other issues. I mean, when they basically relegate or degenerate the paragraph that is important for us to such an extent, then they are virtually buried UFA, that they think like the paragraph that they like, and they totally relegate by calling it preambular, which it is not. So I think that is the gap which cannot be filled by making it a precondition. I'm sure if we had these discussions across a table, and it was not only the two NSAs, my foreign secretary was also going with me. I'm sure Indian foreign secretary would also have been there. I had also requested a meeting with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, so we could have discussed the other things at that stage. So to say that we are determining only the meeting and you can't talk about anything else actually creates a kind of precondition, while saying we are not imposing any condition was unfortunate. Because on such a kind of talk you don't have preconditions.
You're saying something very important, or at least you've hinted at it. I want you to make it very specific. Are you suggesting that you would have brought up the subject of Jammu and Kashmir not necessarily at the meeting with Mr. Doval, but in a separate meeting that you would have had with the Prime Minister? In other words, this wasn't intended by you as a subject for Mr. Doval, but as a subject to bring up with the Prime Minister, i.e. on a different occasion. Is that what you're suggesting? Because you hinted at it.
Yeah, you see, the point is, it was a visit, and one of the items was to meet the NSA. And I think the program had suggested that in the afternoon I'll be able to meet the Prime Minister, because the Foreign Minister, I think, was traveling. So, and I think even during my visit, the Foreign Secretary had also asked for a bilateral meeting with his counterpart. So the other issues could have been discussed at that stage. But to say that these talks or this visit is only terrorism and nothing else created a precondition that was totally unacceptable to us, because they have to be sensitive to our priorities and not insist only on their priorities.
Did you at any point explain in your private conversations and not through press conferences that Kashmir was not a subject that you would bring up necessarily with Mr. Doval, that the two foreign secretaries in their bilateral meeting could discuss it, or that you might raise it separately when you meet the Prime Minister? Did you make that clear in back channel communication to the Indians?
We never had that kind of communication, because what we got was first an advice, please don't meet. Then when we presented our three-point agenda that had gone almost 10 days ago, they then did not say specifically They could have easily said that, well, fine, we are ready to discuss item 3 of the agenda, but in a separate meeting, we would have readily agreed because we had suggested the agenda for the visit. NSA meeting was one of the items of the visit.
Let me put to you the impression that many in India have, not just the government, but also the press. It's believed that Pakistan was insisting that Kashmir must be part of the talks because you had faced a lot of criticism in Pakistan after UFA when it was discovered that the very word Kashmir didn't feature in the UFA statement. In fact, if I recall correctly, one of your previous High Commissioners to India, Ashraf Qazi, actually called the UFA statement a goof-up and a disaster. So were you insisting on including Kashmir either at the NSA level or in any side bilaterals you have because of this criticism you'd faced at home?
You see, when we had in UFA discussion on all outstanding issues, from our point of view, Kashmir was there because the most important outstanding issue is Kashmir. But when India interpreted this, that since the word including Jammu and Kashmir is not there, it reflects a change in our policies to de-emphasize Kashmir. Within 3 days, UFA was on 10th of July, and on 13th of July, I held a press conference to clarify that from our point of view, Kashmir is very much a part of UFA, and whenever we meet, we will discuss this. So this press conference of mine was there before India, and for them to insist that you come to Delhi but you can't even mention the word K was very unrealistic and unfair.
Let me put it like this. If Kashmir is so central to Pakistan's concerns, and if it is, as you repeatedly say, the core issue, why did you not ensure that it was mentioned formally and directly by name in the UFA statement?
We did suggest this, but India did not agree and said that since you are saying all outstanding issues, that is included, and since we have accepted this paragraph, because this was our addition into the so Indians should have seen that we accepted the joint statement because this paragraph was included. Then to say this is a preambular and is of no importance was obviously overlooking this important fact.
But you said something very important, Mr. Aziz. You said you did insist on it initially that Kashmir be included specifically by name in the UFA statement. India didn't agree, and then you accepted the Indian alternative of all outstanding issues. Are you suggesting in a sense that you perhaps fell into an Indian trap?
We didn't think of it as a trap, but now it appears so, because when they said Kashmir is included in all outstanding issues, so why do you insist on the words? Otherwise, there is no statement, and didn't want to spoil the atmosphere. So we accepted this, but that is why in 3 days, my clarification modified the UFA statement to that extent.
With hindsight, would you today accept that from Pakistan's point of view, not mentioning Kashmir specifically was a mistake? That UFA from your point of view is therefore a poorly phrased statement. Would you accept that?
No, I don't think so, because when we say agreed to discuss all outstanding issues, Kashmir, whether mentioned or not, is there. So to say that we agreed to omit it and then revived it is not correct.
Except that that phraseology has given Mrs. Sartaj the opportunity to say very clearly that India will discuss all outstanding issues, including Jammu and Kashmir, but those issues were not meant, she says, for the NSA talks. She says that the NSA talks were specifically and only meant for terror. And the point I'm making is that the way UFA is phrased allows her to make that interpretation, and as you said, you may have fallen into a trap.
No. When I said that, they said that all outstanding issues include Kashmir, so the understanding was that UFA includes Kashmir. Now later on to say, and then she did not say we will discuss it later. He says we will discuss Kashmir when all the issues related to terrorism have been resolved. How do you decide that? Because terror was always discussed along with other issues, including Kashmir, in the composite dialogue. So how does India unilaterally decide that now the sequence is we must first deal with terror in all its dimensions, and then if we are satisfied, then we will discuss Kashmir.
So the impression you got from Mrs. Sartaj's press conference of Saturday afternoon is that India was pushing Kashmir further and further down the agenda, and there was no immediate likely prospect of Kashmir being discussed at all.
That is the unfortunate part. As I mentioned, My feeling is that India is not prepared to have a substantial discussion on Kashmir, and our feeling is that unless the core issues are discussed and outstanding issues are resolved, trust will not restore, tensions will not end, relations will not improve. So the purpose of all dialogue is to achieve those objectives. We are not taking dialogue for the sake of dialogue, but to achieve the ultimate objective. So if the outstanding issues are not going to be discussed, then obviously the relationship can't improve and the tension will remain.
Okay.
So if India is using these NSA talks on terror only to put off indefinitely discussion of all other issues, then this dialogue is counterproductive, and thus we said our statement that the dialogue will serve my NSA level talks will serve no purpose if they are undertaken on this basis.
Now, the second issue on which the talks collapsed, Mr. Aziz, was Pakistan's insistence on meeting Hurriyat. Given that these talks were to be about all issues connected to terrorism, what connection has Hurriyat with that subject?
First of all, the important thing is we are not inviting Hurriyat leader to the conference table. We are inviting them to a reception in accordance with the tradition we have established that whenever a political leader goes to Delhi, they meet Hurriyat leaders. There is no reason for us to deviate from that. For India to make a big issue out of it was totally unwarranted and I think unjustified. And I think this is again something that should not be made a precondition. This has happened every time, and now for the second time to cancel the whole dialogue after the foreign secretary level talk just because we meet 2 or 3 leaders is totally difficult for us to understand.
You say that this has happened every time a senior Pakistani leader has come to India, but the truth is, and you know this as I do, that when Mr. Nawaz Sharif came for Mr. Modi's swearing in, he did not meet Hurriyat. Now, if he could make an exception then, why were you not prepared to do so again today, particularly when you had said, and I'm quoting your words to you, that the main purpose of the meeting was to reduce tensions on the line of control and restore trust by addressing each other's concerns regarding terrorist activities. If you really wanted to reduce tensions and restore trust, why insist on meeting Hurriyat at this particular point?
Well, I think again, Hurriyat leader meeting has become symbolic of India's willingness to talk seriously about Kashmir or not. And that is why it is important. It is not a meeting alone. India is indirectly giving a signal that you leave aside discussing Kashmir, you can't even meet Hurriyat leaders. And that is, I think, a red line for us. Unless India is ready for serious discussion on Kashmir, no dialogue, meaningful dialogue can take place, whether on terrorism or any other issue.
Let me put it like this. I accept that Pakistani heads of government have been meeting Hurriyat leaders since 1994 when President Farooq Lagari began this tradition. But you know and I know that Mr. Modi is a new man, he's a new Prime Minister, he views the matter very differently. After all, that's why the Foreign Secretary level talks last year in August were called off. Given that background, surely you knew that if you insist on meeting Hurriyat this time round, it will lead to a breakdown again.
Well, let them. If that is the basis on which they want to have a dialogue, we are not going to have a dialogue.
One other question. I'm reliably told that the Indian government indicated to you that they were happy and would have no problem if you met Hurriyat after the talks were over. That is to say, on Monday the 24th evening, but not before the talks. Why was that not an acceptable compromise? Meet them after the talks, don't meet them before.
That suggestion was never conveyed to us.
It was never conveyed to you at all in any shape and form, even behind the scenes and on a telephone?
Well, somebody in Washington told our ambassador, which came to us a day later, that why not try this, but the Indian government never conveyed this to us.
If the Indian government had formally conveyed this on a phone call, would this have been an acceptable compromise? Meet the Hurriyat after the talks, not before?
Well, I can't say that now, but probably, but at least it was not conveyed to us.
But you say probably, in other words, it could probably have been an acceptable compromise.
Probably. I won't say that. We would have considered it at some level, but that was never conveyed to us.
I'll tell you why I asked, because in September last year, when you were interviewed by my colleague Rahul Kanwal, when you were at the UN, you actually said to him in that interview that possibly the High Commissioner meeting Hurriyat before the Foreign Secretary level talks was wrong. It would have been better if the High Commissioner had met Hurriyat after the Foreign Secretary level talks. That being your position then, I say to you that if this had been offered as a compromise now, I take it to be logical and consistent, it would have been acceptable.
Well, we don't want to be the only one offering compromise solution. The other side should also do that.
Now, let me put this to you. One of the conclusions that follows is this, that if meeting Hurriyat is going to be a problem every time you come to India because Mr. Modi doesn't like it, and if you won't come to India without meeting Hurriyat, then it seems that India-Pakistan talks cannot happen in Delhi for the foreseeable future.
They can happen in Islamabad. I welcome Mr. Dowell to come here.
Did you, by any chance, suggest that as an alternative location for this meeting that eventually got cancelled on Saturday evening? Did you ever suggest if it's a problem in Delhi because of your conditions, come to us?
Well, these things came to a head only a day before the meeting, so that was not the appropriate time to suggest this. But I'm suggesting now that if he wants to come here, he will be welcome.
Let me put three images and impressions that the Indian people have. Not the Indian government so much, but the Indian people. Many in India say that Pakistan has in effect gifted to Hurriyat a veto over whether India-Pakistan meetings will happen or not. How do you respond to that image and impression?
Actually, India has done that by giving them a veto. If they meet us, what harm has done to the relationship in the past because we met them? So why make such a big issue out of it?
In other words, you're saying it's the boot is on the other foot. India is the one who's given Hurriyat undue importance.
Well, India has to consider that.
The second impression that many people in India have is that, in fact, Pakistan insisted on raising Kashmir at the talks. You insisted upon meeting Hurriyat because, in fact, you wanted to find a way out of the talks. This was your way of scuppering the talks. This was your way of ensuring the talks were called off by India.
This is a very unfortunate impression. We are not only very keen, we had made proper preparation. We are looking forward to it because in talks there are always some issues on which we differ. And I said in one of my interviews that we have many issues that divide us, but there are many things which can bring us together. So I'll focus only on the positives so that things move forward. So there was no reason why we would try to scuttle the dialogue, and but the conditions under which we were asked to go were totally unacceptable.
But you're absolutely certain when you say that Pakistan wanted to go ahead with these talks and you weren't creating problems by wanting to raise Kashmir or meet Hurriyat so that India called the talks off instead. You're absolutely sure that is a wrong impression in India?
No, but we were presumed that India will be ready to discuss at least the modalities of other issues, not just substantial discussion. I mean, once, if in UFA we say that we agree to discuss all other issues, you at least begin to discuss, okay, we will discuss them in 3 months, 6 months, working group, back channel, whatever modalities there might be. So at least to that extent, we were expecting that some discussion on the subject can take place.
This is another very important point you're making, Mr. Aziz. This is the second time you've said that you were looking to discuss modalities. Clarify this for me. Are you saying that when you, and if you had raised Kashmir, it wasn't a substantive conversation you were looking for, simply the modalities of when a discussion would start, what the dates would be, at what level it would be? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, on the 14th of August, when we handed over the 3-point agenda, the third point specifically said to in accordance with UFA to discuss the modalities of discussing all other issues including Kashmir, Sirchik, Siachen, etc. And so the word modalities was there, it was not an afterthought.
So in other words, it wasn't a substantive discussion about how you sort out the Kashmir dispute. It was simply setting an agenda for future talks, working out at what level they'd happen and when they would happen. Is that a correct understanding?
Right. And that was necessary, that was the minimum follow-up of UFA, at least in terms of that sentence, the first operative part that was important to us.
Did you point this out in a conversation behind stairs to the Indian side, that look, we're not seeking to raise Kashmir substantively at the NSA level, we're simply looking to set an agenda for future talks to work out at what level they'd happen? Did you specifically say that in conversations behind the scenes?
Yeah, no, in my press conference 3 hours before Ms. Sushma Swaraj spoke, I said that in so many words.
Now, another impression that many in India have, and to be honest, this time it's an impression that the government has and many government ministers have as good as said so, that in fact your civilian government was under pressure from the army, perhaps specifically from General Raheel Sharif, not to go ahead with the talks. First of all, the army didn't like the UFA statement because it doesn't mention Kashmir by name. And secondly, they didn't want any specific follow-through specifically on terror. And that all of this happened under army pressure.
I don't think this is a common narrative that India loves to project, that probably there is a divide. But in this particular case, since I gave a press conference 3 days after UFA that we will not have any talks with India without Kashmir, this should have been clear. Should have been clear to India in any case that if I'm coming there, we will raise the Kashmir issue in one form or another. The second part, that whether or not the army was on board, we had at least 2 interactions. And all the preparatory work that we undertaken, the army was fully on board, and therefore I don't think this impression in India. And in my press conference I said this, that as far as Kashmir is concerned, it is a strange narrative that India wants to believe that only army is pushing it. I said in my press conference that not only the political leadership, but the whole country is behind this stand, that without resolving Kashmir, relations with India cannot improve.
So once again, you're saying to me that the impression the army twisted your hand is wrong, because the impression in India is not only did the army twist your hand and force you to set conditions that led to the talks being called off, but even the press conference you held in Islamabad 3 days after UFA was signed, it's believed in India, happened under army pressure.
No, I mean, obviously, because the impression got created that by not mentioning J&K, although, as I said, other issues mean the first issue is Kashmir. But since it needed clarification, we did that. But now this time, when we proposed the agenda, the manner in which we brought it in, that first item is terror-related issues. Second item is to see the follow-up of other decisions on UFA, which is LOC, fishermen, and religious tourism. The third item is to discuss the modalities of other issues. So in our view, it was a very reasonable interpretation of the UFA declaration. It covers all the items and not isolate one item which India liked to isolate. And therefore, we thought this will be accepted. And this was done 10 days before the actual meeting. But India, after about 1 week, said terror, only terror. So obviously that could not be accepted, because this means that we give India a veto, or when they want to talk about other issues, they say, well, so-and-so was caught here and so-and-so came here, so terrorism has not been resolved, we can't discuss any other issue. Although in the past, composite dialogue, terror was discussed along with all other items simultaneously.
Okay.
So how can you relatively decide that this time it is only terror and nothing else?
Mr. Aziz, let's now look to the future. Today, after the NSA talks got cancelled, what is the status and future of the UFA statement? In Pakistan's eyes, does it still have relevance, or is it now A, overtaken, and B, irrelevant?
First of all, we will continue to implement those items that were agreed upon, like the release of fishermen. We need to develop a mechanism to have a smooth sailing about verification of nationalities, etc. We are also going to exchange some kind of mechanism on religious tourism. But the more important item is tranquility on the LOC. We like to pursue that item because human lives are involved. A lot of instability on the LOC is not desirable at all. So we are confident that the meeting between our border security forces and the DG Rangers, scheduled for 5th and 6th of September, will go ahead. In fact, the proposal that we had prepared for improving the border situation and restore tranquility in line with the 203 ceasefire agreement, we will probably exchange it in advance, so that some progress can be made on the 6th of September. We also think that on some of the other issues on which we had prepared some kind of material, we will at least share them through diplomatic level, so the minimum necessary progress on those issues like the LOC and tranquility and some of the other related issues can go on.
Now, terror was an important component of the UFA statement, and as you revealed at your own press conference on Saturday, you have in fact created 3 dossiers on RAW's alleged involvement in Pakistan. How will this issue of terror hereafter be pursued? Given that the NSA talks which were meant to be about terror never happened, how will terror be pursued?
Well, I mean, on Gurdaspur, we would like India to share the evidence with us, and we'll take action against whosoever is involved. And we will share our concerns through whatever channel. Even before the NSA talks, we were exchanging information, and we would like to continue to do this either through diplomatic channel or wherever an opportunity emerges. So these issues are not something that are only India's concern. Terror is as much our concern as India's, and therefore we should use diplomatic channel to exchange whichever information is required.
Now, from India's point of view, a key concern is what happens to Zakir Rahman Lakhvi. He's on bail, but your government has appealed against that bail. But the problem is that your government, having lodged an appeal, hasn't pursued it very effectively, and no one knows where that particular appeal against the bail stands. Can you tell me what is the situation regarding your government's appeal against Lakhvi's bail?
No, I think he has been released several times and he's still under detention, so you can see what we have achieved. But the basic point is that we have asked for a specific evidence from the Indian side, and once that is provided, the trial can be concluded very quickly because most of the witnesses have been examined. And I think even now we'll write a communication specifying the evidence that we need so that this trial can be concluded. So that is also an item that we will continue to follow even though the NSA meeting has not taken place.
You're talking about specifying evidence you need to bring Lakhvi to justice from the Indians. But the sticking point, in fact, is that you need to procure Lakhvi's voice sample and give it to the trial court. Tariq Khoza, the former head of your Federal Intelligence Agency, in a recent article has said that the Fair Trial Act of 2013 possibly permits Pakistan to procure Lakhvi's voice sample. And certainly in the UFA statement, there is a commitment in a sense to do so. Will you now procure Lakhvi's voice sample and make it available to the trial court? Because that is a critical issue on which that trial is not moving forward.
I think this was discussed in UFA also. What we need is from India is Lakhvi's voice sample and the recordings they have. If they match his voice, then of course it becomes evidence. But so it's India which has to give us the voice sample, and we will then see in what way we can use it in the trial court.
Just a moment. You're saying that you need from India the recordings of the conversations, including Lakhvi, that happened at 2611. Are those the recordings you're waiting for?
Yes, among other things.
But the voice sample to match against those recordings is a voice sample you have to obtain from Lakhvi himself. India can't give that to you. You have to obtain it.
No, that we will do that in due course when we have the sample from India.
All right. So at the moment, I'm just underlining, you're waiting for the recordings of the conversations Lakhvi and others had on 2611 to be given to you by India. Have I understood that correctly?
I think so. I don't want to go into details of all the trial details, but this is what was agreed in UFA, and that's what it says in the UFA declaration.
One other thing.
That we need evidence to expedite the trial.
One other thing. In April, the Islamabad High Court gave the trial court a 2-month deadline in which to finish the Lakhvi trial. Since then, not 2 but 4 months have passed, and that trial hasn't completed. What steps are you taking to expedite and fulfill what the Islamabad High Court itself stipulated?
We are still awaiting enough evidence from India, because what we have, and that's why the communication that I was taking with me is a 3-page communication detailing all the evidence we require. So we'll still send it and hope that it will come and then will enable us to expedite the trial. We are as keen as India is that this trial should be concluded quickly, even though Samjhauta has taken much longer and doesn't seem to be any in the Samjhauta trial. People have also been released on bail. So I hope the other side will also reciprocate.
Now, at the moment, as you know, the talks collapsed on Saturday. There is, as you said, increased distrust between the two countries. Some people believe there is also bitterness in the atmosphere. Will we now see a stepping up of ceasefire violations on the line of control and the international border? Could we see more acts like the terror act in Gurdaspur and Udhampur?
I hope not, and we had nothing to do with the Gurdaspur Act, so I don't think Pakistan government has any a way to sort of try to duplicate that. In fact, we want evidence against whosoever so that we can take action, and the ceasefire violations are totally undesirable, and I think both sides should, and we are sending our proposal how to de-escalate, and I hope, because that's a humanitarian issue, civilians are dying in much larger number. We have hundreds of violations in the recent past, which is very unfortunate. So I think this is one area, talks or no talks, which we must try to curtail and reduce to the minimum.
Now, at your press conference on Saturday, you said that in fact the Director Generals of the BSF and the Pakistan Rangers were scheduled to meet on the 5th and 6th of September, and you've just confirmed in this interview that they will. But on Saturday, you also hinted at the possibility of some sort of meeting in New York at the time of the UN General Assembly. Do you today, in today's circumstances, really believe that a meeting between the two Prime Ministers in New York in September is A, possible, B, desirable, and C, it would be fruitful?
Difficult to say. I think since India had imposed conditions and cancelled the NSA level talk, I think the ball is in India's court. So if any proposals come from India, we will then see.
But Pakistan will not propose or suggest a meeting in New York itself. Have I understood that correctly?
Not likely.
Not likely. One other thing, the UFA statement mentioned quite clearly that Prime Minister Sharif had invited Mr. Modi to visit Pakistan at the time of the SAARC summit, and it also said that Prime Minister Modi had accepted Prime Minister Sharif's invitation. Is that invitation, as well as its acceptance, now in some doubt?
Absolutely not. I think SAARC is a multilateral forum. We are talking bilateral issues. So this multilateral forum of SAARC is a very important occasion, and I hope and I am confident that Mr. Modi will come to attend that, because in the last 10 years, no Prime Minister from India has visited Pakistan, and this will be a very good opportunity for Mr. Modi to take part in the SAARC summit.
Finally, Mr. Aziz, I know diplomacy is not conducted through the media, but at this point, when talks have broken down, when trust is low, when bitterness is growing, and who knows what the future holds, is there something you might want to say to the Indian government to encourage them to find an early way of resuming the dialogue which is now stalled?
Well, the basic thing I'll say is that the whole world is watching whether peace will return to South Asia. And peace can't return to South Asia unless the outstanding issues between the two countries are resolved, tension across the LOC is reduced, trust is restored, and serious dialogues begin. So the world is going to move on, connectivity is going to expand between different regions, and we become hostage to our own mindsets and our own attitudes. So I hope that the sober and the saner elements in India will advise the government to restore. I don't think friendship between India and Pakistan is likely in the near future, but normalization certainly, but normalization with dignity, and as I said in the beginning, greater sensitivity to our sovereignty and our dignity.
In the spirit of what you just said, do you think it would be wise to fulfill something you mentioned in your press conference on Saturday, that if you can't give the 3 dossiers you have on RAW to Mr. Doval, you will then give them to the UN Secretary General? Do you think that's a wise step? Might that not be counterproductive, particularly now?
Well, we will see, because India itself is all the time accusing us of various things, and we have exercised maximum restraint. In Sharm el Sheikh, some dossiers were, of course, exchanged, and basically it means that in this, we are always blamed for the activities of non-state actors who are not totally in our control. But we are talking of state actors. And when they get involved in activities that harm our security, then obviously it becomes a very serious matter. So if India keeps blaming us for the smallest of incidents and blaming us through the media without any investigation or without any evidence come forward, and this really infuriates and creates a strange negative perception among the public. And later on, when it's proved that the incident was irrelevant or was small or even fake in half the cases, then it's very difficult to restore. And the ultimate relationship between two countries depend on the attitude of the public. And I think the general role of the Indian media to play up the negative aspect of our relationship is very unfortunate and does no service to improve relations.
All right, Mr. Aziz, let's leave it there. I'm very grateful that you agreed to give this interview, to speak at such length about the issues that are divided the countries, and to respond in particular to the points Mrs. Swaraj made. I'm very grateful that you spoke to us. There we leave this particular special episode with Sartaj Aziz. If you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.
You are watching India Today.